It is Thursday, June 7th, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am from SiriusXM as well as MMA Fighting, and I am your host. Joining me to my left is El Niño Colombiano, Danny Segura from MMAFighting.com, as well as the man in the hat on the end from The Ringer, as well as MMAFighting.com, Chuck Mindenholm.
Good to see you repping your team, man. I like this.
C-A-P-S, caps, caps, caps. I was telling them before when I was at Union Station today, coming up on the train, I was walking through the concourse and I had police officers high-fiving me, back-slapping. I felt like the town mayor once in my life. It was pretty great.
Soak it in, man. You guys have been waiting a long time to celebrate this.
We'll talk about that more after the beat, but let's get to our MMA topics. Gentlemen, there's a lot going on in the MMA world. Some of it tragic, some of it sad, some of it quite great. UFC 225 is taking place on Saturday. What a stacked card in two different ways. If you look at the card, it's got a ton of interesting matchups, right? Like, this is a high-ranked guy versus a high-ranked guy. This fight offers, I don't know, a ton of action. But there are a gazillion storylines, too, that are all trampling each other. So let's unpack them a little bit, right? Let's start with CM Punk. Now, anyone who knows anything about me knows I have not been the biggest...
I was going to say, this had to be a reluctant first topic for you.
It actually wasn't this time. This is why it's so notable. This is the first time I'm actually not reluctant to talk about him, because this is a very different scenario. There's still some problems with it in my mind, but let's look at it for a second. First of all, I was like, he's been really quiet this whole time. There was no media that was done up until yesterday, essentially. Then you find out on Tuesday, it had slipped my mind, he had this defamation court case that went totally in his favor. And Danny, what's kind of interesting about it is that he had admitted that this had clearly stressed him out, that his emotions were so raw when the judge announced the decision, I guess from the jury, he burst into tears. So let me tell you, what do you make, or let me ask you rather, what do you make of CM Punk's week? What does it mean for his Saturday future? What do you read into this situation?
This is a crazy situation because, I mean, I saw in an interview he was talking about, like, how he was in court and he was cutting weight, like he was in his process. So
you ever heard of such a thing? I never heard of such a thing.
It's ridiculous, all up to the point. It's pretty crazy, and it's crazy. You know, he has to deal with so much with the public and everything, and on top of that, he has to deal with this plus fight preparations. It's insane how much he's undertaken. But you know, Duke Roufus recently spoke to MMA Fighting, and he was talking about how this can all, like, people see it as negative, but it can also motivate him because, you know, now he has all this pressure, this huge weight lifted off his shoulders. And now, you know, come fight day, you know, he's losing and he just wants to, you know, perform. So I can see it going both ways, but I mean, it's hard to see also how it can be beneficial just because, like, there's so much stress involved. It has to take away, a bunch of time, mind space. I mean, you name it. It's a very taxing thing to be in, especially during fight week.
So, good thing or bad thing, Chuck?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think it's a bad thing because I can't imagine a scenario where you're in court and you have that kind of, you know, stress on your life before the next stress, which would be making weight, before the last stress which is going out there and potentially humiliating yourself a second time in the UFC and hearing all the stuff that comes with that.
And then having to answer for all the media.
Exactly. So it's a very weird situation. But I will say this: there's a newfound, like there's a newfound admiration I find for the guy. Because if you're ever wondering about his burning principles and all the things he stands for, straight edge guy, you know, all this stuff, I feel like this is a perfect indication of that. You know, he's going through this. He sat down with Ariel Helwani and he gave him a very nice interview, and he was talking about, you know, he never over through 4 years, which really taxed him during this time. The whole thing that bothered him wasn't so much the money or whatever was going to come out that way. It was more that he was telling the truth. It was the truth that was bothering him, and I feel like that's kind of like his quest in general. He wants to tell the truth about himself in this weird way after being a fictitious character in the WWE for so long, and he's going into this. He goes into a very literal fight. Obviously, there's no choreographed going on Saturday night. So you look at all that, and you can't help but appreciate in some way this guy. He's not just this weekend warrior that I think that some people want to accuse him. You realize this is a guy who has a different, he operates a little bit on a different level in terms of himself, like how he handles himself. And it just adds to his story a little bit. I don't know if it really matters in terms of the merit of going in there against Mike Jackson, but the bottom line is it just adds, like you're mentioning, one more crazy story to a week that's full of them.
I have to say, it doesn't change my criticism of him there. It was never a character assassination. I mean, I guess it is for some people. But my argument was merely if you want to be on a martial arts journey and you actually want to get better, this is probably not the place for you, although we'll talk about that in a second. But here's what's crazy to me about this. He could have lost. He could have lost on Tuesday, which he, by his own admission, said would have been financially ruinous for him. And then you have to go and fight on Saturday. Like, that is so risky, but it also speaks to somebody, to your point about the principles, like you want to call him a fighter. Well, we'll see how good of a fighter he is against Mike Jackson on Saturday. But internally, he's got not merely a competitive spirit, but he wants to stand in this world on his own 2 feet. I have found, I'm totally with you, Chuck. I have found there has been a layer of personal admiration I've discovered for him through this process that I didn't know was there before. I still don't think he should be in the UFC.
True.
And I still think it'll be a bad look depending on how the things go. But it's been a new look to CM Punk that I've really appreciated. The other thing, Danny, that I really liked about this, he did no media. Again, up until last week. He said no to everyone who wanted to come by the gym. He said no to everyone who wanted to do a phoner, and no to all the Skypes and who God knows who else people want his attention. Was that the right call?
I think so. I mean, dealing with so much, we just talk about how stressful it can be.
But he didn't promote the fight, though.
Yeah, and you know that's also a lot of controversy because he's also on the pay-per-view card rather than the Fox Sports 1. So as far as from a promotional standpoint, he's taking a slot that he's on the main card because the UFC thinks he can sell pay-per-views, right? And you do that through media, through promoting the fight, being on social media, and he did none of that. So that's problematic within itself. But as far as going into the fight, just the media obligations alone add so much to fight weeks, add so much to, take so much toll. I mean, Conor McGregor talked about it. He's like, if you want me to do media, you have to, pay me a certain amount, you have to do this or that. So I think it's the right call for him. He was dealing with so much that I think it's good to stay away from the news.
Yeah, but also a different kind of media, right? Like he gets a different kind of attention, which isn't the normal thing. Like, hey,
the court case itself is proof of that.
Exactly. So I'm like, most people are dealing with, hey, where would a win put you in the division? Things like this. None of this really matters. Yeah. This is probably, this could be it. It probably is it for him in terms of the UFC. Win or lose, possibly. It's like one of those situations. A lot of people are only, it's more of a Gawker mentality from the outside of people. Maybe he doesn't need to do as much promotion in a weird way because he's just CM Punk, right? He's not going by Phil Brooks in there. He's still going by CM Punk. It's its own, promotion just to have his name on there. Plus, he's fighting in Chicago. The people are going to show out and adore him regardless if he, can defend a rear naked choke or not. You know what I mean?
You find it surprising he told Ariel he didn't know if he was going to be booed or cheered? I found that insane. Like, I don't know how much he's going to be cheered, but I find the idea that he would be booed unthinkable. It sort of tells me he's tried to block out what the MMA media or the forums have said about him. I don't know how much it's worked.
I love his sincerity. He's a very sincere person, but I'm not sure I think that he has to instinctive think that Chicago's going to be behind him. I mean, you know how it is, man, in MMA. Like, it's geography first. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. You're fighting in your hometown, and I feel like people get behind, especially places like that. It's a good sports town. So I would be shocked, honestly, if I heard many boos coming in his favor. I mean,
I don't buy that at all.
It's just, you can look at it how you want, but at the end of the day, bottom line is, it's a courageous act he's doing because he stands to humiliate himself a second time, and he's cut from a different cloth. You know what I mean? To keep trying this, so you can look at it that way, and you can squint and you can admire him from afar in that sense.
I mean, I can see his point where he is not sure if he's going to get booed or not, because if you just go by social media, I mean, most of the comments about him are pretty negative, and I know most of the people that probably weigh in are not going to be all in Chicago, and he's a Chicago guy, but I mean, if you tune into social media and you're there seeing all the comments and seeing all that, it's pretty negative.
He's a showman. His music comes on Living Color. Imagine that popping through it. Have you guys seen? Have you ever seen his walkouts in the WWE? I
saw the one at 203.
And then you're in Cleveland, right? It's just so big feeling. Once that kicks in and stuff, there's going to be cheers, man. I mean,
were you there in Cleveland?
I was in Cleveland, and it was just. It was really cool because he knows the moments. He knows big moments. He knows how to get that thing, and he's just. And
I don't want to sound like Jason Whitlock, but Twitter is not real life, man. And there never was. I've said this before. I'll say it again. It was never more clear to me when you just look at what people say about Tito Ortiz on social media. Yeah. And then he went to some of those Bellator shows. You thought the guy was a god. You couldn't believe how different the guy. So I understand his. It must be hard to be bombarded like that, but nevertheless. Question for you though. What do you expect on Saturday? Good things for him or bad things for him?
I mean,
no predictions exactly, but how do you think he will? Because you can lose. He can lose and still have a really great effort.
Yeah. I have more of a pessimistic outlook on this. It's just, he is fighting Mike Jackson, which kind of gives me some sense of relief in the sense that he might be able to do well against him. But at the end of the day, these two guys are 0-1. These are not like very skilled martial artists. And I'm not sure how much of the Kimbo Dada 5000 maybe we'll get. I mean, because I think, for example, the first outcome with Mickey Gall was...
Yeah, let's hope nobody almost died.
The first outcome with Mickey Gall, I feel like that was in a way pretty good because it was quick. It wasn't a fight that dragged on. I feel like with Mike Jackson, he's not Mickey Gall, you know, and I feel like there's a chance that this fight might drag on for 15 minutes. And again, this is not high-level MMA, and it could look ugly.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario for him was that he just, because we didn't get any sense of, we saw his aggression in that last fight and then him get punished for it and it was over. It was like, that's basically what we saw. You'd like to see some pieces because what has it been 21 months since that fight? It will be, what has he been working on? How good is he? We don't even know.
Yeah.
The big unknown is really what goes into this. So you're like, if he goes in there and, you know, he kind of pieces Jackson up a little bit on the feet or something, like just to get the crowd. I mean, to me, any of this would be a revelation, right? So I feel like if he just has some moments in there and shows some skills, I think that it'd be okay for him, win or lose. If it went to a decision and it was actually pretty skillful in the end, like there wasn't too much to criticize, I feel like we'd all look back and be like, hey, you know, good for you.
Yeah.
I think going the distance would be terrible for the both
In
of
all
them.
likelihood, but I'm just, you know,
if you go to regional MMA, those fights, you'll see the promoter will put 20 fights on the card because 15 of them will end in 30 seconds.
Yes.
I'm expecting
Same with Bellator.
I don't know, yeah, right.
Yes.
I don't know about 30 seconds, but I'm expecting this one to be over relatively quickly. And if it goes the distance, that's when the cardio will, like your technique is no better than when you're fresh. Trust me, by the third round of somebody who's only been trained a couple of years, it ain't going to look too good. So I actually think it'll end earlier than that. I'm really curious to see. By the way, people keep saying, oh, Mike Jackson's going to run over him. I had lunch with Mike Jackson. He's a lovely gentleman. I don't know how good he is either.
Yeah.
I don't know why there's like extraordinary confidence in him. It's a coin flip for me.
he's an alum of the MMA Beat.
Yeah, exactly. Right? How good can he be? All right, so that takes us down the card. Or not, I shouldn't say down the card, but down our own note card here. Let's talk about that main event. Boy, you want to talk about flying under the radar.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about CM Punk. Everyone's talking about Colby Covington, which we'll get to a little bit later. Everyone's talking about RDA, which we'll get to a little bit later, and Holm and Anderson. This one, there's virtually no discussion of it. And to me, it's incredibly compelling. You have a guy in Yoel Romero, maybe the best athlete in the UFC, who, in my mind, is figuring out how to fight to his strengths better and better and better. Looked incredible against Luke Rockhold. Yeah. Then you have Robert Whittaker, who he's not there yet. He has work to do. But if you're eyeing somebody down the line who you can pinpoint as a potential pound-for-pound serious contender, it's that guy. Yeah. Why is it so quiet?
I mean, Robert Whittaker is not really a trash-talking guy, and we know that's what drives, you know, today's promotion. And, you know, Yoel Romero, he also has English barriers as well, and he himself, he's not a guy. He went toe-to-toe with Bisping, but, you know, that was a different scenario. If Robert Whittaker's not poking at him, Yoel Romero has no reason to go out of his way and talk smack about him. So, you know, that's definitely a reason why perhaps it's not being talked about as much. And it's also a rematch that we saw not too long ago. Sure. So, you know, fans might be not as excited as they were for the first time they fought.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's how we defaulted into this rematch, essentially. There were so many different scenarios with GSP and Bisping and everything that was going on, and then Whittaker gets the belt, then he's he falls out of the fight, and then there's this interim when he misses weight. It's just so many weird elements to this that ended up becoming like, here we are again.
Time is a flat circle.
It's a weird setup. Anybody within the hardcore realm, and I guess when we're talking about why we're not talking about, we're talking about media a lot of times. If you follow the complexity of the situation, that's a little off-putting. Just even all of that. The other fight, I mean, I don't know what you thought of the first fight. It was nothing. It was a good fight, but it wasn't something that stood out.
I loved it.
Well, I know that's what I'm saying. Some people really did love it. Yeah. I saw it as a good fight, but it wasn't something that you were like, I need to see that again, or something like that. So I think that all of that just plays into it. But I'm still fascinated because Yoel Romero is who he is, you know, and Whittaker is who he is. It's like Whittaker is one of these guys who so quietly, you know, he takes out Jacare at a moment when Jacare seemed, you know, like he was a world beater. You know, he beats him. He quietly goes about his business of doing the same thing to Romero. Doesn't say a word about going in and rematching Romero. Even it's like the Max Holloway-Aldo situation. You know, these guys, it's really admirable to see when they're like, hey, I have to do it again. I'll do it again. Let's just get this division rolling. And I love that. You know what I mean? So there's some really cool aspects to it, but the fight itself I think it'll dawn on us a little bit when they're making the walk, or, you know, when we get close to fight time, that what a good fight it is to bring those two guys back together.
Let me pitch it back to you. What's the story of Yoel Romero's career if he wins?
Man. Ooh, that's a tough. I mean, he's been amazing. What is he, 9-1 in the UFC? He's something.
41 years old.
Yeah. And he's still performing at this level. If he's able to do that, again, it would just be one of those strange, curves, and because it's weird because you've seen him coming. He's been very telegraphed. We've watched him the whole way, but for some reason, he just is never in the conversation.
I feel like all of his wins always feel like surprises.
Yes, and there's always a weird component to his victories. So we talk a lot about the weirdness of something that happened within the fight. You know what I mean? Like, so like, just you could go back to any of them really and point to some strange quirk in that fight. Maybe that's it, but I would have to, I mean, at 41 years old, to beat a guy, what is Robert Whittaker, like 27?
Yeah.
And on the streak that he's on, and like at the prime of his career, I would, hats off to that guy, man. I would be like, Romero is, at that point, he's solidified it in my mind.
He'd have wins over Jacare, Machida, Weidman, Rockhold, and then Whittaker, if you can do that. I mean, you're talking about one of the all-time great middleweights, right?
Yeah.
Jenny, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, this guy's career is, I know he's 41, but I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. I think he's got a few years left in him, which is crazy. I think he might
about
be
light heavyweight recently.
Yeah,
going up there.
I mean, I think he could be maybe the most successful fighter to keep on fighting past their 40s. If he does get a victory against Robert Whittaker, and just everything he has to went through, you know, and he even said himself, it's like, I wonder what would have happened if I would have taken MMA when I was 22, you know, and it's just unbelievable. Because he said, athletically, I've slowed down, but yet he's still at the top of his game. So his story is just insane, and the neck injury that he had to, you know, undergo through, which almost cost him his life. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And even going to his backstory further, I mean, just the whole, everything about his life has been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, he's a success story. I mean, even if he loses on Saturday, it's still a success story, but it just reminds me that it could be an even crazier turn. I know everyone calls it, what is it, Soldier of God?
Yeah.
He should be T'Challa. I've never seen a man move like he does at 49 years old, no less. All right, but that brings us to the other side of the equation, which of course is now Robert Whittaker. Let me couch this in a larger conversation, because I feel like if he wins, he told Ariel it'd be the beginning of his reign, and he had this sort of interesting comment that he doesn't take the idea of championship seriously. Not that it doesn't mean a lot necessarily, but that he's involved in the process, not the outcomes per se. But let me couch it in a larger conversation, which is you have Robert Whittaker on this card, you have Tai Tuivasa on this card, who's sitting just outside the top 10, and you have Megan Anderson, who, if you add the three up together, I think by anyone's measurement, you're talking about three of the best oceanic fighters of all time, right? And Tai Tuivasa is still very early in his career, so maybe that's a bit of an overstatement, but he's climbed up the ranks quickly. So, Danny, do you feel like Australia is on the precipice of having a breakout moment? Because here's what I mean. They've had a lot of, again, there's been some, you have Israel Adesanya on the Kiwi side and Mark Hunt too, although he sort of straddles both. Dan Hooker, Jake Matthews. You've had some ones who are on the come up and have floated below. But now you've got Whittaker, title holder. Tai Tuivasa, is it hard to imagine if he keeps going at heavyweight, he could be far from a title shot? We'll see. I'm just saying. And then Megan Anderson literally could be one fight away. Is this Australia's breakout moment?
I think so. I mean, if all those three win, you know, on Saturday night, I mean, all of a sudden you can go back to Australia or Oceanic and put on a card and have, you know, several people on the main card that are from that area. And not only that, but are top contenders. So I think so, for sure. Especially, like, keeping in mind, like, Robert Whittaker, Megan Anderson, Tai Tuivasa, like, these are not fighters that have been around for forever and that, you know, this is their moment. And if, you know, they don't achieve whatever they achieve, you know, on Saturday night, you know, it's over for them. These guys are still pretty young. I know Tai Tuivasa, I think he's 30, but, you know, for heavyweight, that's still pretty young. So
that's like 15.
Yeah, that's like 15. So
that's true.
No matter what happens, you know, this is a young crop that, you know, shows a lot of promise for
100%. And Tuivasa, like, going up against, you know, another legend basically is like one of those situations where he can make a quick leapfrog in a bigger sphere. Because I feel like his last fight certainly put him on the map doing the shoey and all this stuff. We you know, you saw what he was capable of. If he's able to duplicate that, I think he makes a pretty big leap right away. And the fact that he's kind of like a Mark Hunt protege is weird because it's almost like you're getting Mark Hunt. It's just how it seems to me. You're getting like a young version of Mark Hunt, not one that was inherited from the Pride deal, who was 500 fighter, who ended up being like kind of a cult hero in the UFC. This is a guy who's already kind of there. So if he hits the ground running a little more, it's like you're getting all the fruits from what Mark Hunt could have been for a long career in this guy. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting to see it from that angle. And Megan Anderson, I think it's one of those situations for her where, you know, it's a crazy situation in that if she wins this fight, it's a triumph and a cruel sentence in a weird way, because then it only means one thing, which is just to go up against Cyborg. But here's the thing: she's new blood, and we've talked about that fight. We've marinated on that idea a little bit. And if the Nunes fight does not happen with Cyborg, I think that's the best option. If she's able to look good against Holly Holm and put together a really nice win, she's won. I think her last 4 fights have all been finishes. You know what I mean? And if she's able to put another one in Holly Holm, and that would be some nice momentum finally for somebody like Cyborg to put those two together as a natural, featherweight. So yes, it very well could be a big moment, but you could see scenarios in all of these fights where those guys lose or women lose. So it's going to, they're all stacked with a very tall order to get to make that happen.
Again, we'll see if these guys win their fights. All three could win, all three could lose. No one really knows. It does seem to me though that we might be underestimating or just undervaluing Australia's contribution to MMA. You have this talk about Darren Till. Could he be the next thing in the UK? And obviously Michael Bisping's contributions and his achievements are all really important. But you already have a guy in Robert Whittaker, who I mentioned they don't come a whole lot more talented than that. The only thing is he got the title in a weird way, and he was supposed to fight this guy, and it didn't work. And he's not very brash or outspoken. But Megan Anderson is not too far, potentially, from another title shot. We'll see about all these other guys I mentioned. You've got Jake Matthews and all the other ones. Do we not take how good Australia is at MMA? Is it simply because of their distance from us, quite literally?
Possibly. It has been sort of slow. Remember George Sotiropoulos?
Yeah, but there's so much attention on like European MMA, and Australia is already killing the game.
No, I agree with you 100%. The UFC's been over there multiple times. I mean, they've been over quite a bit, and we've seen, like I was mentioning George Sotiropoulos, I was just talking to him a couple weeks ago. Somehow that piece is lost in our system. It's supposed to run at any time. But I was just talking to him. He just opened up a gym in Melbourne, and it's. I was talking about that. Is this the moment where Australia like gets on? He's like, yeah. He thinks so, because it's like it's kind of thriving at this moment over there, even if it seems like it's plateauing a little bit in other areas, and he just thought it was a natural process of the way global things work, hits one mark and then the next. But it certainly seems that way to me, man. It just seems like, for whatever reason, we have not considered Australia. I don't know if it's just we want to romanticize British fighters or Irish fighters, but Australian fighters,
we should.
Yeah, but we don't really. We just don't romanticize Australian fighters. I don't know what it is. But I think this is the best crop of guys we've seen, collectively, where there's enough fighters coming out of it, especially with Adesanya and these guys. There's enough fighters now where you look at it and think, hey, man, in another year, we could be talking about multiple champions, not just, one guy or somebody breaking through. We could be talking about several people who are holding belts from Australia or from the area,
I think distance definitely plays a part in it, but I also think that we haven't had a specific person from Australia come out and take the mic and sort of, like Conor McGregor. What did Conor McGregor do when he got on the mic? The Irish are taking over. We're not here to take part. We're here to take over. Darren Till, Michael Bisping. They've made sure to, sort of put wherever they're from, on the map. I feel like we sort of haven't gotten that from Australia. We haven't had somebody get on the mic and say something, crazy, but
Elvis Sinisek?
No. There was another one.
Let's not forget also like who's around right now. So Tyson Pedro. I mean, you go on the list. There's tons of good guys coming out from that area. I think they're very young still, as you mentioned, and I think once they get a few wins, like the Tai Tuivasa needs a win over someone like Andre Arlovski to sort of build the resume. Once we get those guys, get those key wins, now I think they'll get the recognition that they
The fans certainly over there. I feel like we've seen I forget what the Ronda Rousey Holly Holm at UFC 193. What that was a big place. Just the fact that they can support MMA like that, it's a pretty key market at this point. Like I said, you've seen some plateauing in other areas of the world, and especially in North America, maybe isn't as enthusiastic it is. But Australia seems to be just the opposite. I feel like they even in that last card in February or March or whenever that was, I felt like there was a lot of enthusiasm for a card that otherwise we were talking about how good it was, but it wasn't. But that we were a bubble. The bubble faction saw it as really good. Right. The outside world ignored it completely.
Yeah, and also even on the BJJ side, you had Kit Dale before, but now you have Craig Jones out there just starting slaughtering people. So Australia is to be taken seriously. We'll see how they do this weekend. Something else on this card. This is my favorite part of the card, the Colby RDA side of this card. I just love this part. I love how much people can't tweet. It's crazy. People can't tweet me enough how little they claim to care about Colby Covington. I want you to know, Luke, right now, I do not care. Exclamation point emoji. It's like they love telling me they don't care, which of course is evidence that they do. However, there is a point to be made about this, Chuck. He only has 30-something thousand followers on Twitter. Is this a breakout or a fizzle-out moment for Colby Covington heading into Saturday?
It could be either. That's what's kind of fun about it.
What's it going to be?
Man, RDA, tough one. I in some ways, he's so. I'm talking about Covington is so like combustible. You just don't know. I feel like he at any moment. He's kind of riding such a fine line right now that I'm like one tilt one way or the other, and he could, he could blow up bigger, or he could just be like, dude, I'm over that guy. Yep. This is stupid. And especially if he has a bad showing, his fighting style is really nothing that's like, some people you watch them, the fighting style with the personality breaks through. His fighting style is really not, we've seen that kind of fighting style where people really poo-poo them, or like, hey, I don't want to watch that guy fight. I feel like he's going to need a good showing in the octagon to help his own cause. You know what I mean? Like, just grind. If he's able to somehow dictate the tempo and grind out a victory over RDA, I think that, I don't know how much, it would be a big victory, but I don't know how much that's going to advance him in terms of people wanting to see him fight. But then obviously with the microphone, it's such a wild card, man, with him. The one thing you're mentioning, and it's funny, we've broken into this very like, people want to talk about him almost like he's playing a game where he's dictating the rules, like a fraction reality where he's an Andy Kaufman of MMA type of figure.
That is exactly who he is.
So he
might be a bad version of it.
So I was going to say, now, if that's, then people need to realize then that this is what's going on. And because I feel like where we're getting caught up is, some people don't get his shtick. Some people do. Some people read into his shtick more than they should have. Some people don't. It's very strange, but if he's trying to be like that, I think people need to view him. If you want to try to understand him, you need to view him from that lens a little bit.
Yeah, I think.
Is it working, Danny?
I think it is. I mean, at the end of the day, he's fighting in the co-main event. Fighting for an interim title. Obviously not the real one, but nonetheless, like there was tons of contenders in the welterweight division that you could have choose from and plugged in that scenario. So I do think it's working. And if you just look at the comments, anything we post about Colby, just the comment section blows up.
Yeah, I don't care about this guy.
People care about him. People care about him. And at the end of the day, they might not be fans of his, but at least they want to watch him get his ass whooped. So,
I see so many comments like, I don't care about Colby at all, ... But I can't wait to see RDA smash
imagine
him.
if he
I'm like, mission accomplished.
There you go.
He has 100% identified a certain psychology in the fight game, which is, it doesn't matter if they hate you or love you. It matters if they care. We've talked about this before, and I feel like he has identified that. When people point out that they don't like him or whatever, they go out of their way. It's just they're basically saying that they care on some level, or they'll tune in for the thing you just mentioned.
And it's like a weird, like, I don't care type thing, because, like, for example, we've seen these type of sort of fighters come in the scene, like Josh Koscheck. People don't really like them, but his is almost that it feels like his game is somewhat fake. Like people are not really buying into him, and people are just like, this is just an act, and people are just kind of like,
it's pretty obviously an act.
People are just kind of constantly trying to figure him out. It kind of like pro wrestling in the sense like, this is fake, Yeah, clearly we know.
I don't understand.
It's just people can't. This is so we deal in reality, right? Supposedly in the fight, in some version literal, or like we deal in like a literal sense of what's happening. It's not pro wrestling. There's not like a gimmick or a script. There's these guys are supposed to. So when somebody's playing that, it is very Kaufman-esque, right? People don't know how to behave with that sort of thing. They just don't know how to take it because you're not. It's such a sideline of reality that they can't do it. Like, that's the whole thing with Kaufman, right? Like he was
wrestling women.
That's what I'm saying.
And he had a belt where he was the champion for beating up women and then rubbing their face in the mat. Can you imagine that today? People like, this guy isn't humorous. He's crossing the line. That's the whole point.
Exactly. So if he's high-minded enough to be doing that, and I don't know if he is, but if you want to view him on that level, I think that that's a better starting point than just being like, I don't understand. If you want to even play his game, that's really the thing. He has to now define if we want, whether we should, whether he deserves for us to play his game. You know what I mean?
I think that's exactly right. Look, when we're comparing to Andy Kaufman, I'm not saying he's as skilled as a troll artist as Kaufman was, but it's in the vein. I think that's the appropriate way. And I do think, by the way, this could all blow up in his face if he loses, right? If he can't keep winning, the shtick kind of loses favor. Part of the reason why you can't stand him is because he did have the Demian Maia win, and he is on the precipice of a big fight. And if he gets that, he's on the precipice of another big fight. And so you want to see that cigarette extinguish a little bit. It's like he and I couldn't be more different. Like he's the biggest Trump guy on earth, and he's calling everyone. Huh?
Is he?
Yeah. I mean, did you see his interviews yesterday?
Of course.
Yeah. And it's like
I don't know.
And the guy makes me laugh because it's not that I think that calling everyone nerds and virgins is hysterical, but just the responses to it. F this guy, I don't care at all. Yeah, you do, nerd. All right, but that takes us to the other side of the equation, RDA. Someone actually pitched this question. You have a point?
No, go ahead. I was gonna mention RDA, so you're saying.
Yeah, so let me bring it up to you, Chuck. Someone asked me this question yesterday. I actually didn't know the answer to this. My hunch is that no is my answer, but you guys might prove me wrong or have a different opinion. RDA has an incredible resume already. And we know he was the champion already. Now, he did lose it to Eddie Alvarez in the first round, but, of course, he's coming off that win over Robbie Lawler, up a weight class. He has a win over Anthony Pettis, right? And Pettis at his peak,
ridiculous one, too.
He took the belt from him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now he is about to face Colby Covington for whatever you want to call the interim title. I'll leave that up to you. But, Chuck, if RDA wins on Saturday, is he an all-time great?
I think he's in the discussion. I really do. He did hold the lightweight belt. I think that Eddie Alvarez fight is the only weird blemish really in a long string of fights, because I think a lot of people thought he would win that fight. He didn't. But if you look at, losing to Khabib Nurmagomedov, there's no shame in that. You know what I mean? It's a weird. He has had the weirdest career. Remember when he got his jaw busted up against Clay Guida all the way back at UFC? I mean, I remember I was there in the building for that day, and I just remember I kind of knew a little bit about him because he'd been around a bit. But you're like, you just thought of him as a guy who was there for a while, and pretty soon you'd be, hey, whatever happened to him? And here he is all these years later at these moments, and it's the way he wins too. Like, he just dominant when he's on, and he's putting that pace on people. It's so dominant, and he's to transition up in weight, to do this at another weight class and to, beat guys like Neil Magny, who go unsung, really great fighters, and just do it so, you know what I mean? That Robbie Lawler, just to win those fights. It's amazing. I can't, honestly, man, it's only because he's had a couple of blemishes early in his career and he's had a couple later that people would be hesitant. But if you look at his whole body of work and the names he's beat, Cerrone, et cetera, so I'd put him up there with the greats. I mean, we'll have to see how his career ends, but especially if he gets this win, if he's able to get a second belt, I just feel like he solidifies his name.
I would say no. I don't think if he wins, he'll become an all-time great, but I think he'll have the opportunity to become an all-time great. I think right now, in my opinion, he's the most well-rounded fighter pound for pound in the UFC roster. I mean, he can do it all. If you want to grapple with him, okay, he'll grapple. If you want to strike with him, he can strike at a pretty high level. But, he only defended lightweight belt once, which we know, if we look at the greats, Anderson Silva, GSP, all these guys, even John Jones, all these guys have defended the belt for so long, and that definitely speaks to the greatness, right? So I think he's missing that. But definitely winning different belts in different weight classes helps.
I mean, he's
his
still
case.
got a chance to do that
sure.
too, but he's going to have a very hard time doing that at welterweight for any sustained period of time.
100%. And let's not forget, at the end of the day, like, this is for the interim title. Like, the real champion, Tyron Woodley's still sitting down holding his belt. So I think this definitely helps his case, and it'll push him that direction. But I think there's still work to be done, for sure.
Very quickly, if we can, what is a storyline on this card we haven't talked about that people should pay attention to?
I would like to throw out there, I mean, there's so many, but Alistair Overeem versus Curtis Blades. I mean, Overeem, just last week, we were talking about how Michael Bisping, how, like, losses in MMA, you kind of just, fighters just make whatever they make of the losses. We saw Ronda Rousey make the world out of her losses. Michael Bisping didn't care about the losses, didn't let that define him. Well, I just get the same feeling with Alistair Overeem. This is a guy that had some pretty bad losses. I mean, he looked like a killer coming into the UFC, and then he had a really rough stretch with Antonio Silva, Bigfoot, the Travis Brown. I mean, he had some pretty bad losses. He was just recently knocked out by Ngannou, but yet he keeps coming back. And I don't think he's done yet, and it wouldn't surprise me if he gets another title shot in the future. So
yeah, I would say the potential for the turning of the page for a lot of these guys. You got Rashad Evans way down the card. This could be the last time we ever see him.
Anthony Smith is no joke.
Yeah, exactly. This is harder than his last couple of fights, I think. And he's in a must-win situation, maybe even getting an extra mulligan they shouldn't, that type of thing. Alistair Overeem could take a big step backwards. And Andrei Arlovski, we've talked about him for so many years, like being on this precipice of like maybe starting to disappear the other way. You've got so many guys like that. Joseph Benavidez coming back after so long, on the shelf. If all these guys, there's a lot of history on the line here. If these guys lose, I think that we might have seen not the last of them, but I think that a lot of these guys, you will see, whatever, it'd be the case closed. We went past their prime. Like, we're never going to see them in the forms that we remember them in.
Yeah, it's got a bit of a UFC 222 vibe, where the young kind of pushed out the old.
Right.
All right, we spent enough time on UFC 225. Let's turn the page here just a little bit if we can. Conor McGregor back in the news. Number 4, no, where was he on the all-time Forbes list? Was he 4? It was 4. So it was LeBron, Messi, Ronaldo, him. No, I'm sorry, not LeBron. It was Mayweather. What am I saying? It was Mayweather who was ahead of him, ahead of everybody by double digits, it appeared. In any case, saying, if I had fought
Not bad for an idle year.
God, I can't believe I don't get paid this money to do this gig. In any event, he had intimated in a Instagram caption that, if I had fought, on that UFC 224 card, I'd be ahead of Ronaldo and Messi, which is probably true. However, here's something kind of interesting. Let's backtrack a little bit here. Supposed to almost fight Edgar at UFC 222 and didn't. Supposed to almost fight Rafael dos Anjos at 170, right? In an interim belt in Brazil. Didn't. Was supposed to almost be a part of this, what do you want to call it, 4-man tournament.
Yeah.
Now, I trust some of the reporting about this, that there is some smoke or there's some fire where there's some smoke, right? I do know that the UFC in certain of these cases at least discussed it. But you had RDA yesterday being like, no one ever called me. I didn't hear a word about this.
Surprising.
Right. I talked to Adam Hill of the Las Vegas Review-Journal yesterday. His theory, Chuck, is that this is all a cover. Not all of it, but at least the case of the 224 one, that it's a cover for the UFC 223 stuff, so they can say, well, we were going to do that for him,
right,
and we pulled it away. What do you think is actually happening here?
I mean, it seems that way, doesn't it? It seems like something like that. Like, well, my best intentions. Can't you honor my intentions? Like, it's as good as I haven't done them. It's like that old, I was gonna. It's just another way of saying I didn't, And I feel like he's in one of those situations where he's under a certain amount of scrutiny and criticism from people who are like, what are you doing, man? Are you ever fighting again? And it just keeps going on. And it's just a way of saying, like, hey, I was going to go fight this guy, but now this thing happened. The bottom line is, let's just say that somebody's saying it's true and that Dolly incident basically ruined it. Well, that's still his fault. It doesn't matter what his intentions were, whatever, in UFC, 223 to go and ruin that card in big aspects. You know what I mean? So whatever it is, it doesn't reflect that well on him. I don't know what the point of saying I was going to, or you know what I mean, or it was in the works or any of that stuff, because it doesn't mean anything. I don't think it advances his cause. It doesn't make you pine more for the fact that it didn't, you know what I mean? It just makes you more frustrated in the end. And I'm just like, at some point, like, stop playing games. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to come back, if you get through your legal process here, next week, I guess, is coming up.
A week from today?
Yeah, a week from today. So get through that portion and stop with all stop with that stuff. Let's get a fight on the schedule and finally see you fight again. I feel like that's the only way that we get past this.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much he cares about sort of public perception, but I know for a while, especially after Mayweather and him not being active in MMA, a lot of people were asking, like, yo, he's not a real fighter, the money changed him, this and that. And this is sort of a way for him to come out and say, as you mentioned, like, hey, look, I was going to fight, but, things didn't play out,
So, in other words, you think it's like PR cover? Like, I'm still in the mix, but,
yeah, I mean...
Oh, man, my train was late. I couldn't make it.
He's also dropping that in the midst of the title that he was supposed to fight in, welterweight. And I wouldn't be surprised if he tries welterweight in the future and tries to go for that belt. So I think this is, he's always been a genius since day one and keeping his name in the news at the right times. And I think this is just part of it.
I mean, he's always got a big picture in mind. He's played that perfectly well, better than any MMA personality we've ever known. He's just always has 10 steps ahead of everybody else in terms of how he's going to project what's going to happen. This is the first situation where he's kind of retrospectively dotting the the landscape. Like, now we're kind of operating from the opposite side of psychology, where he's like, I was supposed to, or I was going to, and all this. It's the same kind of concept. He's just kind of doing it backwards than forwards this time. But ultimately, man, I realized as he kind of swelled back into the news cycle again with the Forbes thing and all this stuff, I think I was kind of enjoying this little Conor sabbatical where we weren't really thinking about him for a minute. You know what I mean? So just to get him back in there, I'm just like, get through your thing next week and then get a fight. That's what I'm at that point. Yeah. It just gets so old, you know what I mean, to talk about what ifs and
He is a bit of a black hole in that regard, right? Like, you can't have any conversation where he doesn't come up, or not really comes up, but kind of takes over, frankly, the conversation, especially, of course, at lightweight or for any kind of title or any kind of money issues, which, as we know, are ubiquitous.
You get the sense, though, like, even through all this kind of hatred moment where people are like, oh, man, fight or whatever, that it's just this teeming like interest that's just been bound up waiting. As soon as that fight is announced, it just gushes open again. You know what I'm talking about? Because I feel like that's really what's happening.
Yeah, you see,
I thought for a little bit naively that maybe he was losing some steam. I don't really think so anymore.
Yeah.
Like even through all the legal things that are going on, I see people.
I think he did lose steam.
He
but I
did.
think he can manufacture it again fast.
And I think that's what I'm gonna say. I don't know what it'll take, but he'll find it, and we will be right back to where we were. I just want to see him get there again, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
While he's still in his, while it's still interesting to everybody.
Sure. And it's just funny because like he says that, and like if you just look at our homepage, it's all UFC, 225 stuff, and the interim welterweight title, and then Conor McGregor right next to it, an article. So he just finds ways to sort of plug himself in. And the good thing about him, what's going for his advantage, is that he's got ties to the 3 hottest divisions in the UFC. Featherweight, he beat the champion, Max Holloway. At lightweight, well, he was just the champion not too long ago. And
Threw a hand truck at that guy.
yeah, and now at welterweight, he's got ties there, and he's making sure that he keeps those. So
With eggplant emojis.
yeah,
Thinking about y'all's belts.
I wonder
Hashtag
what
boner.
that means. Yeah.
Kind of funny. All right, so there was some news this week.
Vegetables, that's all.
Yeah, just think about vegetables, eating right, training hard,
Healthy.
doing his prayers and vitamins and everything. So there was a story this week. I kind of want to put the end of the beat because it's kind of beaten to death a little bit, but we'd be not doing our jobs if we didn't cover it a little bit. So let's talk about it. The weigh-in changes. Dana White wants to change the weigh-ins and go back to the way that it used to be, where you weigh in at roughly 4 o'clock local time, depending if it's East Coast, of course, on the West. Danny, go first. What's the big takeaway from the story there?
I saw a lot of people weigh on this matter on Twitter,
that
and
pun.
I didn't. But at the end of the day, this is a decision because I'm not the one weighing in. I'm not the one weighing in the fighters, and I'm certainly not the one trying to fix the mess if a fighter misses weight or not. So, my opinion shouldn't really matter in that subject. But
I'm glad I pitched this question to you first then. Thank you.
in that sense. But I do want to say, though,
I don't know why you're asking me, Luke. I don't.
No, I do want to say that there's 3 parties involved in this that should have a right for this decision. The fighters, the promotion, because they have to deal with what happens.
Of course.
And also from a health standpoint, doctors also have to weigh in to see if this is a healthy option or not, right? From what I understand, 2 of those parties were left out, right? When Dana White talked about removing the weigh-ins, I don't think he gave much of a medical, statistics. Like, yeah, we've been doing research and collecting data, and it is healthier for
Somebody put out
fighters.
the stats. I think you were
Mike Bond.
Mike Bond put out stats of 62 versus 22 over a stretch.
62 versus 32.
Yes.
2 years before and after.
So I think he just sees something like that, and this is a black and white issue for him.
But I don't think he consulted medically, and there's research behind that. And I don't think the fighters were consulted either. You just look at Twitter; it's all the fighters are weighing in. So I would like to see those 3 parties come together and sort of figure this out, because at the end of the day, it's a decision that involves all of them.
It's one of the stranger left turns in MMA that we've had, because when they introduced the morning weigh-in, it felt like it was universally praised. I felt like there's very little dissension about that, because they're like, it just made more sense. There was more time for rehydration. We were talking about all that type of thing. Etc. The ceremony could be separate. I felt like people liked that idea. So, it's a left turn for all of a sudden, 2 years after the fact, we're back to that, saying, no, we're going to go back to the old way. I didn't foresee that coming, to be honest with you. I saw that you were gauging. You probably have a better sense just from pondering this through the responses you got. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, I don't know what's better for the fighters, because the numbers speak for themselves. If that's really the true statistics, you're like, what? Why is that? I don't know. You know what I mean? I feel like the fighters themselves like the idea of the early morning weigh-ins, but since then it has felt like a straight up, game of craps if everybody's going to make weight or not, and which fights are going to fall out. So I agree that Dana's always a little hasty in how he handles this, but I agree that maybe something needs to be relooked at, and some real data needs to be collected on this, because I don't really know the answer to it. But you'd like to see, I'd like them to come up with something where people have the best advantage to make their weight safely, but that's like saying I want to win the lottery.
Yeah, right. Couple of points here. It's not that I don't have sympathy for the fighters. Of course I do, right? You see fighters literally going blind trying to make weight.
Yeah.
And it's no one wishes that upon them. But unless you signed your Project Spearhead card, my sympathy is real limited for you. I got to be honest. Y'all can talk all y'all want on social media about how this is unfair. What are you doing to fix it?
I know.
We'll see. We'll see when those Project Spearhead, tallies come around, what people actually did and what they didn't. Because if you didn't, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's a leveraged world. Either get it or don't. Number one. Number two, the other part is, like, Dana's methods are so just... Do you guys know the artist Banksy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? I saw a documentary. You ever seen Through the Gift Shop, the documentary about him? There was an art critic who made a point about him once, and it's like, I like Banksy, he's fine, but his art is just bang you over the head with a gavel in your face. It reminds me of like Dana White's methods. He just comes in with the gavel and just starts hammering people, and it sets them off, and I understand that. But it's like, how do you not understand the UFC's position here?
Yeah. Right.
How much bad press do they get every single week from people not making weight, or making weight and Mackenzie Dern's coming in over 8 pounds, or this person made it and this fight fell out and this person got sick?
And forget about the bad press. All they have to deal with, because promotionally...
And then the fights fall through.
Yeah, they have to figure out, like, look at the Max Holloway situation when he was going to fight.
What a
Khabib.
nightmare.
All the promotional material
pull strings
gets altered. All the night of production has to be altered.
All the money they
lose.
lose.
It is ridiculous.
I'm not saying that
Ticket sales,
I'm not saying that the way Dana handled it is right. It's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, are y'all really surprised he wants to do something about it? And there's no union. Who's he going to call? He's going to call up Chuck Liddell one more time. Hey, Chuck, what do you think the right answer? No, he's going to make unilateral decisions because, by the way, he's allowed to. Not because it's a good thing, just because that's the way of the world.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know why everyone's like, well, this is a terrible travesty. I think the answer is let folks, Michael Chiesa made this point once, let folks have a choice. They want to weigh in.
Right.
He said his idea, I love this idea from Michael Chiesa. His idea was you have to fly in and check in on Tuesday at fight week, right?
Yeah.
Let him know right there. I'm going to be weighing in early. I'm not.
Yeah.
And now you know. And now you know. And I think the choice is always the better option rather than not. But if you're not signing Project Spearhead cards, you're not putting your money where your mouth is, you don't have representation, and you want to complain on Twitter, good luck.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Speaking of Twitter, speaking of complaints,
look at this segue.
Yair Rodriguez, what happened? Your boy.
Yeah.
By the way, why isn't it La Pantera?
Well, no, from what I understand, it's supposed to be La Pantera, but from what I understand, he takes his nickname, is not just, Panther, but it's actually a character from a cartoon that is called El Pantera. So that's the actual name, although it's not.
I could have sworn I was like, I don't understand why it's
correct,
but okay, neither here nor there.
It's from the band. Anyways, go ahead.
Oh, Pantera. They wouldn't be La either. Yeah. All right, but here's the point. He was out. We talked about it. We couldn't believe what a travesty it was. And here we are, we're back. Chuck, we know what this semi-story is.
Yeah.
I think my understanding is, I don't know if he has a new contract. I don't know if he has a same pay, less pay. I don't know any of those details. I don't know what the conversation. But my understanding is, from what I was told, pretty good authority, it was the initial overture at reconciling this came from his side.
Yeah.
Okay, now you can take over that, whatever you want that to mean. I asked him the question about this previously. I'll ask this one to you. What's the lesson here?
Man, I don't know. But I guess the lesson is try to work these things out in private. I mean, in some ways, because, I mean, the way this thing blew up was both sides kind of went public. In fact, even at was it the Liverpool show that just happened? People were asking about Yair at the post-fight presser, and Dana's like, it's clear that Dana, being a promoter, is going to say what he needs to say. And they're like, he was just like, hey, if you don't want to take fights, you go elsewhere. Right. Go elsewhere. He's still just basically bullying the situation to, what it is. I don't know, man. This is one of those situations where things like this go on all the time. When people get fed up on either side and you reach this kind of impasse, sometimes, I don't know. He talked about having a mediator, essentially, who was kind of connected him to Sean Shelby. Maybe something like that is like what some people need. I don't know, but these situations are a little bit too dramatic for me, and I'm like, in some ways, if the UFC had no intent, it's just a weird game. You know what I mean? If the UFC is kind of dangling.
I guess what I'm wondering from you is this a happy ending, or did this reconciliation actually portend bad things?
It feels a little Stepford Wife to me, because I feel like Yair is just kind of like, okay, I'm the happiest I've been, and let's get on with this, and who knows? I can't really assess his true happiness on it, but the whole thing strikes me as a little bit like somebody was strong-armed or something like this, and all of a sudden they're in the situation to fight. I don't know how it strikes you guys, but it's still a horrible fight for him, I think, in a lot of weird ways. I know people, I put this on Twitter, and I think, like, however they worked it out, if this was the compromise, okay, now we're going to do it here this date, and you're going to fight this guy. He's still got he might be looking at 2 losses in a row, and it could be an ugly loss again.
I mean,
you know?
at the end of the day, the UFC got the situation that they wanted, right? They wanted Yair to fight Zabit. But I think, this is also a lesson about, maybe like 4 years ago, fighters coming out publicly and going against the promotion wasn't really a thing. And we talked about that, and there was sort of a change. And then it almost seems these days we see it with Ala Quinta and many other fighters.
Right before the show, he tweeted hashtag fake news.
Yeah.
Raging Al is a beast.
And we've seen so many fighters come out and publicly, show their discontent with the promotion. And then for a while, it kind of seemed like that was okay. Like, you'd be okay. Like, nothing really bad was going to happen to you. But with the Yair case, and Yair's not your prelims guy, this is a guy that has headlined 2 UFC cards. You're still not exactly on the safe zone if you go out there publicly against the promotion. So you still have to, tread lightly and sort of choose your words.
What's interesting to me is, beyond these facts, is that Dana's getting his groove back.
Yeah.
You ever notice that?
That's one thing that struck me for sure.
Like, between this situation and the weigh-in things, he's kind of like, he even said it on UFC Unfiltered podcast, I'm not fucking around anymore.
I know.
And again, I'm not here to endorse his methods. But if he's done stuff that's worked in the past and there's nothing to stop him now, why would we think he wouldn't keep doing it, right? So this is the other situation.
At one point,
this is about fighters not taking fights. And we had 2 different months, no one in the top 10 lightweight booked, no one at welterweight top 10 booked. You think Dana's just going to sit around and take this?
We used to talk all the time about him controlling the narrative. Dana White getting out in front of the narrative, controlling the narrative. Even if people could figure out, just by doing a little math that, he's doing that purposely or it's a lie. He was very good at controlling the narrative. Over the last couple of years, he has not been controlling any narrative. He's just been, it's been ebb and flow in any way the media or, the fighters want to talk about. He's not really responding. It's almost like he's taken a step away from it. But I agree with you 100%. I've noticed that as well. Who knows how long it lasts? Right. I don't know if this is just like, hey, flex your muscles a little bit again and get people back in mind, and then you can go back to the beach or whatever. But I have noticed that, and it's very funny. What was the John Fitch situation with the video game?
They didn't want to sign over their
like that stuff. That's what this whole thing.
The only thing about the John Fitch one was, to your point, he didn't want to sign away his likeness rights. Yeah. So Dana was like, I'll cut you and all of AKA.
Right.
And then it was resolved overnight, basically.
Yes.
What was interesting about this one is that it lingered.
Yeah.
There was a gap between everything. That's why I was like, that's kind of weird, right?
Skepticism and speculation and all these things start to intervene in there. Just a weird setup. But in the end, you're like, well, the UFC did this correctly because they still have a guy who's 6-1 in the UFC and represents a market that they still believe they haven't tapped yet, in Mexico and everything. So I feel like he is still a huge asset for them. He's still a young guy, and if he's able to get things rolling, I mean, he still could be. He's a potential star for them. So it's like it seemed ridiculous for them to lose him over something like this, All
right, this takes us to the saddest story. I mean, I had alluded to this.
Oh, wow.
Earlier in the week. I just find it pathetic, the whole thing.
This is the Golden Knights story.
And pathetic for the sport is what I mean.
Okay.
This Nazi tattoo controversy. First of all, again, just in the age of social media, you could find somebody being like, yeah, I beheaded this dog for no reason. And you could just, the local reporter could report on it and be like, why are you snitching? Why are you talking about this guy killing his dog? What's wrong with killing a dog? It's a dog. I mean, people will defend anything in this modern day and age. And of course, there were a lot of people who were rightfully upset about it all, but there were a lot of people as well being like, stop snitching, stop lying, or whatever dumbass opinion could be.
Stick to sports.
Yeah, it could be cobbled together to defend. Totally indefensible.
Yeah.
But we had this tattoo thing. Here was my read on this, and for folks everyone knows the story. Andrea Lee, who's a very good fighter, and she recently won in a very good fight. She's quite a talent. She was out celebrating at the lake or some kind of water environment. And her husband or significant other had a Nazi swastika and then the SS bolts. And my whole read on this was, look, man, you got to do what you got to do to get by in prison. I really don't care that he got the tattoos, to be honest. It doesn't bother me at all. And I can understand if you didn't want to get additional tattoos, but you would still want to make some kind of societal effort. Like, what is your place in society? You have to make a choice about that, right?
Yeah, you're not in prison anymore.
Right. Unless you intend to go back or something. I mean, but I don't think he does, and I don't think anyone does, right? Or at least not in this particular case. But here was my read on this. Everyone got bitter at us. Not everyone, but a lot of people got bitter at us for talking about it. I want to ask you, Chuck, what the right answer was. It's like, do y'all not do y'all watch other sports? You ever notice that like other reporters don't do this very often? It's because other athletes don't do this shit. Like, and again, you have your Richie Incognitos here or there or something. But like, that's my read on the situation, and everyone's heard it. What is yours?
I mean, there's a lot going on in that. You know, the bottom line is, you look at a guy like that, and you obviously, it's how they handled it, right? Like, it's the first response from Lee, just being like, what was it?
Sensitive ass mofos.
And I'm like, that's just such a poor. You wouldn't even come close to somebody handling it this way in another sport. These people have no sense of professionalism in that sense. Like, it's just, I hate more than anything when people issue these hollow non-apologies and things like that. But at the same time, I'm like, they make more sense than just being like, you guys are idiots, you know, that sort of response. So that was a horrible look. It was a horrible look for her. Her young career is now associated to this whole dark cloud for no good reason. He comes out, and I know some people kind of liked what he said, some people didn't. But the bottom line is, I'm like, dude, listen, you are now in a public eye. You're in a position where you have to address something like this. Whatever the personal reason you have a tattoo like that, and you say it's in your past, you know, you are now representing something professional. You're a brand with your girlfriend or wife or girlfriend.
I believe it's wife.
So don't say that you can't. You know, your body is a palimpsest. You know, you could make it into a box. You could make it into a tic-tac-toe board. I'm like, you could do anything.
The other thing was, it wasn't like his tattoos were awesome.
No, I know. I agree.
I wouldn't want to.
I agree.
You know, it wasn't like the Sistine Chapel or something.
And the worst comment was, "Oh, we've explored those options. Those are not options for me." But then a few days later, come out and saying, "Oh, if the artist can make it look less trashier, then maybe we'll consider covering it up." But it's like, okay, well, you did say you considered your options. By you saying you consider your option, then coming out and saying this, you clearly didn't. And I don't know what's more trashier than a swastika tattoo. So.
And I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like this whole, I've got an Asian friend. Are you crazy? How can I be racist?
I know. This
just drives me nuts. It drives me nuts.
It's crazy. But the other thing that sort of reminds me, it's like, dude, aren't you guys, are you numbed out by this shit at this point? Here's what I mean. Like this, whatever you think of this situation, man, this is not going to be the last of this kind of thing where, you know, you got, and I like Mike Perry. I like Mike Perry a lot, and I think highly of his abilities. But he gets like a 23andMe test, and he's 2% African-American, allegedly. And I know Tyron Woodley gave him a pass, but Gerald Harris was real upset with him. And he's just dropping the, can you imagine another sport where people are doing this?
No.
Doesn't happen.
And it happens all the time.
I talk about this a lot. Fighting is an interesting thing. It's a safe haven for the outer edge, like the people who want to come in and they find something that they can be passionate about and be accepted in an edgier sense. So you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of fringe element that finds its way to fighting. Fine, I love that element. I love the fact that it doesn't have to be PC. But there's a line still that you have to freaking adhere to. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't, as soon as you become anything in this sport, you need to realize that you're a brand or whatever. You have to treat yourself as a professional, and the best people do that. You know what I mean? They understand, they get smarter as they go along. They don't get dumber. They don't defend dumb. You know? And I feel like that's what we were seeing in this last episode.
I just can't believe it's 2018. We have to be like, you might want to wear long sleeves to cover that Nazi tattoo. And people are like, what you mean? I cannot believe we have to have that conversation.
It's his body. It's his body. If he wants to put, I see people saying this stuff, and I'm like, I don't know what it's gotten to for us to think that way. You know what I mean? Like it's a crazy.
I like that MMA, Danny, is a little bit counterculture. I like that it lives a little bit on the fringe because it does lighten the mood to an extent certain times where you do have to just let some things slide, but then it also creates this environment where there is wide latitude for absolute toxicity in this sport, and we have to just call it like it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's our job, right? You can't go on and post a photo on a lake, you know, on your public Twitter and show that around and then not expect some sort of, you know...
retribution.
Yeah, right? and the worst part is like, oh, mind your own business. It's like, you're on Twitter, you know?
I wish... It's funny, man.
You posted on social media. What do you want me to do?
I mean, and I'm pretty sure, like, he said, like, he was like, oh, I got caught up in the excitement and posted. I'm pretty sure if you have Nazi tattoos, you would know that you have them, right? You'd be aware of them in any situation. So if you take photos of them and you're posting them on Twitter, I mean, I don't know.
It's such a weird sport. What was it? There was a cat that was fighting for Strikeforce. Roger Bowling, you remember this? Or I think that was his name.
Oh, he fought White Steel.
Right. There was some guy who had some tattoos, and it was a.
And it was a major blow up.
Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to say. Like, because as soon as that guy entered a cage and represented a brand, you know, it's like it became like, well, how would you let this guy through? There's got to be better monitoring situation. You got to know who these people are.
And in fairness, Andrea Lee does not have these tattoos. It's her husband who is not a part of the UFC in that sense.
Yes.
But it was her response being like, sensitive ass mofos was her word. I mean, I can't believe it.
Oh.
You know what? There's going to be another rock, and there's going to be another worm probably in a couple of weeks, couple of months, right?
That is a guarantee.
It is an absolute guarantee. Real quickly, because we're running out of time here, I want to move on. There were 2 events over the weekend. So I'm going to actually combine them together into one. There was UFC Utica on Friday, Bare Knuckle FC on Saturday. This is a real question, Danny. Which one was more entertaining?
I mean, just from an entertaining standpoint, I watch both. I would go Bare Knuckle FC just because, like, it was. I don't know. We talk about how MMA is so, fringy, but, we've watched MMA for so long that this was kind of like the next step. Like, wow, no gloves. And, like, you just see the blood, and it was just, like, nonstop action. Like, it was definitely the most entertaining as far as.
By far. I mean, the Utica card was just kind of going along, and people were yawning through it.
Marlon Moraes' win
That was amazing. That saved everything. If that had been a boring fight, that card would have been really bad, I think, and look back on really bad. Yeah. But I mean, come on, the bare knuckle thing, it had an element of, it was almost like looking back at UFC 1 with the Jim Brown. All of a sudden you got Tarver. He's laughing at each thing that's kind of happening there. You're wondering who's busting up their hands. You're kind of wincing again. This is the first time I've been wincing because I've been so desensitized by watching combat sports for so long. There's a couple of times where I'm like, oof, because it just seems so
brutal.
Brutal in its weird way. I was entertained, man. I mean, the bottom line is a couple of the fights got a little, like the 10 fights, the pacing was great, but the 10 fights tended to go a little long. But at the same time, man, a couple of those were good. Like I don't know how you think of it from a technique standpoint, but they probably have to refigure a lot of that stuff out when you're talking about bare knuckles. But some of that may have been lacking, but it was certainly entertaining, man. I found it fun to watch.
It felt rebellious. Yeah. And it felt fun, but it was sanctioned rebellion, which is not rebellion, but nevertheless it came pretty close. All right, we're not done here. We actually have a lot more to do, but we're not going to do it on YouTube. We're going to go over to Twitter. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a link that's going to come up. You see it there, live.twitter.com/MMA Fighting. You have been sending us your comments and your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. Well, we have collected them and assembled the best, and we're going to answer or respond to them now. So I appreciate you watching, but we're not done. Jump over to Twitter, and we'll finish up there. See you in a minute.